Dear participants, the session is about to start. Please proceed to the ballroom and take your seats.
Right in front of you. Everything that you can give will only be returned to you. Have you ever felt the sunset? It's full of hope and answers. Let yourself go free and be drawn nothing here. It's not in constant change. This can come with something. Daylight comes tonight. Nighttime. Have you ever felt the sunset? It's full of hope and answers. Let yourself go free and be drawn into these good vibrations.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome again on the stage the moderator, Mr. Alan Kasujja.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's all take our seats, please. Let's all take our seats. I'm sure you can get our number later on, sir. Yeah, good. Let's all take our seats so that we can start this session, if you may, please. A very good afternoon. Wow, wow. I shall give everybody a few seconds to start, to settle in. Shall we all settle down, please? Okay, right. Okay, part of this afternoon's conversation is about unlocking Africa's potential. And it's a great pleasure for me, ladies and gentlemen. This thing looks bad on TV. Let me take it off. I'll take it off in a moment. But it's a real pleasure for me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite my panelists. I'm really hoping that we can settle down and start. That is me in a very polite voice. Let me just invite my panelists to come up, if I may, please. Starting, first of all, with Yuri Dadush. Let's give him a round of applause. And he's a senior fellow with the OCP Policy Center. And we also have Yang Guang, who is the General Director, Institute of West Asian and African Studies, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Let's give him a round of applause as well. And then Jaiyeola, who is the CEO, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Let's give him a round of applause. And then Miguel Moratinos. Are we done? Please make sure he talks to you later. Him, yes, yes. Yeah, you. Yeah, I'm trying to get the session started. Miguel Moratinos, let's give him a round of applause. He is the former foreign minister of Spain. Quite a strong panel. Let's give them all a round of applause. Because there are no women here, I shall expect the women here to represent. So put up your hands and speak if you need to say anything. And today we're talking about unlocking Africa's potential. It sounds like a really tired conversation, one that we've had so many times. But I would like to start off by asking here, first of all, what is Africa's potential and how does it get unlocked? Tell me a bit about your work in Nigeria at the moment.
Well, presently what I do is to facilitate private sector, government sector discussion around how do we enable the environment, how do we make Nigeria more competitive. So we engage from a dialogue partnership perspective, but we do intervention, we do some watchdog work.
Okay, so, I'm going to ask you to pause there for a second because I've skipped an important part of this session. Let's just watch so that you get a better understanding of what we're going to do. Just watch this video.
Africa's growth has slowed recently, yet Africa's economic potential is undeniable. Over the past 15 years, many countries throughout the continent have witnessed high and sustained economic growth. However, most countries in Africa remain mired at very low levels of income and high rates of poverty. Diversification is slow and governance is weak. Which sectors will or could drive Africa's development? What is the role of regional and global economic integration? Policy priorities.
Okay, and this is going to be our conversation. Can I just come back to you, Mr. Jaiyeola? Just set the pace for us. Give me a sense of how you're trying to achieve what you're doing at the moment in Nigeria.
well, first, let me put it in context. We've heard it this morning, talked about the vast potentials and resources that exist in Africa. Natural resources, all of it. We've talked about it. But beyond that, we're all mindful of the fact that the future youth population that will provide the needed workforce exists in Africa. However, how prepared are we to ensure that so the kind of work I do, and my team, what we do in Nigeria is, how do we ensure that both the private sector and the public sector sit down, and how do we make sure that these opportunities we have, we make good use of them?
Can you illustrate that with an example of where you've succeeded?
And I'll tell you exactly what we've succeeded. The company's work, my group has worked with government for 24 years. And we've tried to move government from being non-market friendly to being market friendly. So all the privatization, all the diversifications we've seen in Nigeria is risen because of this engagement with government. if the way it started was that we had an election in Nigeria that was, unfortunately, we had a military dictatorship that cancelled and annulled the election. The private sector got together and said, never again, and insisting that never again. So we got a group of people together and then said, henceforth, we're not going to allow those in power to determine our fate. And we started the engagement. And that's what it's been for 24 years. We are not where we want to be, but you see, we're determined at it, and gradually they are listening.
What is the biggest thing you've achieved?
First and foremost, to move our government from not being market-focused to be market-focused, market friendliness. And that to us is very important. The fact that you allow market to determine resource allocation. Because people still come in and go out there and they want to think that they can have a command system. But the fact that the private sector is saying, you know what, let the market clear the system. Again, I tell you, private sectors are coming with their funding and you encourage them to come and establish and spend their money, then markets should determine the tariff. People then should allow the force of demand and supply.
That's very interesting. And then you've got to wonder, though, this private sector, where is it from? Is it from within Nigeria, or are you bringing in foreign investors? Because those tend to pick up their money and go as quickly as possible.
You see, there are two fronts. There are significant local funding available. And so the first thing you do is that you do some private sector development. However, we all know that we don't have all the resources required. So you need to make your version of both as a job.
We'll come back to you a bit later. Thank you. Mr. Guang, Institute of West Asian and African Studies, what does that do? What exactly are you trying, what do you study?
Okay, I'm studying the economic development of developing world, including Africa.
All right. Is this in relation to the relationship between Africa and China, or?
Of course.
Or is it just based on?
That's part of it.
Right. And what are you finding? Where does the potential lie as far as you're concerned?
Well, talking about the potential of African studies, and my colleagues and I, we all agree that we have to underline the role of industrialization. Africa achieved, great for a long period of time of about around 5%. But I think this growth rate does not reflect the full potential of African development. And Africa industrialization may contribute to faster growth of Africa.
Okay, so that industrialization thing has been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
It's not new thinking.
No, it's not.
But why aren't African countries industrializing? What are the challenges they need to overcome? Or I think the bigger question is, how do they industrialize?
But I think, yes, you're right. Since the independence, a lot of African countries put emphasis on industrialization, but very little was achieved. Some good examples, for instance, Ethiopia. This country has relied on industrialization and achieved a double-digit growth rate for many years. So it's been proved also that worldwide, that the more the country rely on industrialization, the faster growth performance they can make.
And I wonder, when it comes to industrialization of countries like Ethiopia, where does the money for that come from? Or where does it go? Does the government put money into it, like it did in South Korea, to spawn companies like Daewoo, companies like Samsung? Or do you depend on private enterprise or private cash?
Okay. Me, on the sources of funding for industrialization, of course you can rely on your domestic. The fact in Africa is that the rate of saving is quite low. So definitely you have to rely, at least partially, on the foreign direct investment. And Ethiopia has done that.
Yeah, but you see, here's what I struggle with. You argue for free markets, and I think that's the argument you're making as well. Yeah. But let's face it, a lot of Africans can't. It's really difficult for Africans to go with with free market pricing, if I may, for example. Free markets have challenges as far as implementation is concerned on the continent. You don't agree with that?
I don't agree with you at all.
Do you think that the state it's because it has a direct interest and because there are people who directly benefit from.
You see, the thing is that we need to be sincere with ourselves. There's a limit. I sit in Nigeria, the whole Nigeria. I mean, if you take federal government and add out of the subnationals, we don't spend over 10 trillion a year. The bulk of it goes to recurrent expenditure. And we need huge funding for infrastructure. So what you then do as a government is that you then make yourself attractive for people that comes in. And once they come in, you leverage on it, you provide what is required. I give an instance. Take Nigeria, for instance. We'll drop the ball because we're focused on oil. Before we discovered oil, the national region was doing well. We were thriving. All we needed to do was to do the next step of value chain. We didn't do that. But now it is done on us that unless you do some backward integration and do some value, add value to your produce, you're just going to be hewers of woods and drawers of water.
Like oil as well,
Even like oil, because if we were not exporting our crude oil and we allow it to go to petrochemicals and we do all the related things that come alongside it, we'll be better. A Nigerian nation that produces oil but yet import fuel, 25% of our foreign reserve, foreign exchange spending is done on fuel importation. It shouldn't be. So those are the kind of things we're saying. So whether we have the resources as a nation, locally available, it's a combination of both that helps the nation.
Okay, let me just introduce again Miguel Angel Moratinos, former foreign minister of Spain. What is that relationship between Europe and Spain? Is it an equal partnership, or frankly, do you guys just have interests and chase those interests? And
Spain or Africa?
Well, what is the relationship?
Europe or
between
Africa?
Between Europe and Africa.
Yes.
Spain and
Yeah, I meant Africa.
we are very close to Africa, but we are not Africa.
Yes.
Even we have Canary Island that is in this part of geographical influence.
How can Africa make the most of that relationship between with Europe?
We are in a turning point. I think Europe have to change not only the narrative, as we say today, but also their policies, the mentality, how to approach Africa. Africa have to change the narrative, the mentality, and the policy in relation with Europe. I'm the bad guy today here. I'm the colonial. Even Spain has not too many colonial adventure in Africa. But I represent Europe, the white man. And I think I congratulate the organizers because for the first time in Marrakech we have a much more presence of African, Latin American, and other actors to discuss. So the point is that also Europe is changing. We are not more the old Europe. We are trying to engage in this new world with different parameters. And we want to create a kind of vertical, Africa, Mediterranean, Europe. In French, it's very good. They are Mediterranean, M, Europe, E, AM. We need a new soul in our relation between Europe and Africa. And for that, we have to change, not only to have commodities, not to have only a trade policy, commerce. No, we have to get into co-production, co-responsibility, sharing power, co-investment. So a whole parameters
but realistically, those are great ideas. But how achievable are they, realistically?
Well, it has to be with political will and funding, as our colleague was saying. I mean, we cannot engage with African leaders, African societies, African entrepreneurs if we don't come with a strong Marshall Plan. Mrs. Merkel has already announced something. President Macron has been quite active. Portugal big package in financial resources in order to really start with the African interlocutors a new relationship.
You know, you look at the existing relationship between Africa and European nations, and you see Africans being turned away from Europe, being chased away literally. They are getting into Europe from Africa. Who was trying to get a visa recently?
Well,
to try to get a visa into the UK, for example. from Uganda, you have to send your passport to South Africa for it to be processed. And I'm just wondering whether there is a possibility at all that relationship, the way it is arranged at the moment.
Absolutely, thing is interrelated. Of course, the Europeans are quite concerned about illegal immigration. One thing is illegal immigration, another thing is mobility.
But you see, that whole idea that they look at Africans as potential illegal immigrants is problematic itself.
You know, as we have a crisis, and we have to see, to be honest, and it's a big crisis with illegal immigration, people coming. When I was foreign minister.
But you see, that restriction doesn't exist for Afro-Europeans who try to come into Africa.
Yes, well, maybe in 10 years, 15, the ones who were queen would be the European asking in the visa to come and to get the visa allowed by the Africans. Maybe things change. But at that time, we have to really concentrate on that in order that, well, mobility will be a possibility, a real right, and the people can travel. I think personally, I'm against the visa policy. Visa for the 20th century.
Okay, Mr. Jaiyeola, you want to come in?
You know, honestly, each time I hear this migration issue, I guess, let's look at the data. Total African migration outside is no more than 3% of all migrations. Africans migrate amongst African countries. I mean, we move around ourselves. When you have refugee, they are more within Nigeria. So 3% doesn't have, so that really isn't the issue, honestly. But I do agree that for the relationship between Europe and Africa to be strengthened, we need to look at there is a European Partnership Agreement. Nigeria and ECOWAS have refused to sign.
And reached Tanzania and Kenya signed. Yeah.
The reason is simple: the was of rule and our water. As long as I'm going to be just exporting my produce raw, it's not going to work. So what we are saying is that you already have advantage of being ahead. You need to allow me to do some level of backward integration, some processing value addition, so that I am no longer subject to the vagaries of commodity prices, which is different from the approach.
Is that a European problem or an African problem?
It's an African problem. That's where we are. But somewhere along the line, you need to come alongside if you really want to partner with me, which is different from the approach that China is hard in terms of intervening and working with Africa.
So you find that China better?
Depends, again, they are better partners depending on the countries they operate from. Because if you take China government in Africa, the likes have made a good use of what is it they want. They've sat down to define the kind of things they want them to be involved. But other people are just taking the money and allowing some exploitation, and it's being shared between the political leaders. Just like Obi said, the political leadership will define how this thing works. If you have a good political leadership that is concerned about their people, they will ensure that whatever agreement
but Africans pick their own leaders. I'll come back to you in a moment.
It's not about...
Yeah, but let me introduce Uri in for a second. Uri, you've been listening patiently to what these gentlemen are saying, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
So I approach it as an... My impression is that there have been a lot of good news coming out of something like 7, 8 countries that over the last 25 years have seen growth in excess of 5%. And that illustrates the potential. However, the vast majority of these countries have not done well, and not because there is a lack of international links with the rest of the world. If you examine each of the elements of the international links of Africa, you find that they are in, a range not dissimilar from our trade or foreign investment or remittances or aid. Of course, they get a lot of aid. It's not that. That's not the issue. The international linkages. The issue is much more the domestic issues that Africa faces. And I point to 3 weaknesses. Number one is the very low rate of investment for a country, for a continent that is so poor.
Low investment by who?
Total investment in the economy is 20% of GDP, 22%. It should really be more like 32% to achieve the growth rate, the second problem, which is huge demographic evolution of Africa. I mean, I would say these are the two major issues. The third major issue is we're talking about a small economy. The whole of Africa is about the size of South Korea, the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. About the size of South Korea, but it's subdivided into 50 nations. And these nations have relatively weak links with each other. So these are much more domestic issues. 5% growth, which these success cases have achieved, is actually just in the labor force, not more than that. The only way that you are going to get the sort of growth rates you need across the continent, which is an average of 6% for the continent as a whole, is if you raise the rate of investment by about 10 percentage points of GDP.
That's very interesting.
And you will only get that. I mean, some of it can come domestically. As you said, the savings is weak. You can do a bit more domestically, but the vast majority of the investment has got to come from overseas. It can take the form of private investment, and it can, of course, take the form of public investment by international organizations, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Thank you. We're going to talk about unlocking the potential. Could you bring the mic and give it to Professor Mvemba Dizolele here? I want to talk to him in particular because he understands the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, more than anybody else. He works at Johns Hopkins University. And Mvemba, unlocking the potential of the DRC, for example, one of the richest or wealthiest countries on the continent. How do you do that to make sure that it realizes its potential?
Thanks, Alan. Can you? Yeah, thanks, Alan. So I think in the case of DRC, we have to start with the fundamentals. There is no leapfrogging anything. You have, and in the case of DRC, a country that has gone through a lot of turmoil and conflict over the last 2 decades, you need to go to the basics. The will of the people, the word of civil society, the people themselves, particularly private investment, rule of law. You're not going to have rule of law, private investment without rule of law. So every day, in the case of DRC, we talk about its mineral resources, particularly. Every other month, you hear about embezzlement. You read reports about $780 million that have disappeared. And that is capable of happening because, A, there's no transparency internally, but also the conglomerate, the global conglomerates of actors, the so-called investors, are also part of the problem because they're taking advantage, including the World Bank.
Including the World Bank?
Correct. Because the World Bank has pushed for contracts that are totally skewed in favor of investors, not in favor of the country. But thank God the DRC has a very strong civil society, one of the strongest in the country, in the continent, actually. This is something that gets lost.
What does the civil society do? Because otherwise they would have elections, things would be happening.
Well, actually things are happening because of the election, because of civil society. So
right.
President Kabila is struggling to stay in power because civil society has been fighting.
Okay, but fundamentally, so we know about the potential. You're able to identify the problem. So how do you correct that at a policy level to make sure?
But that's what I just said. You have to go back to the basics. So donors cannot continue not working. They should be demanding more. Okay. You cannot use stability to say the other way if they
So you are in the Gambia, which is, you are at the forefront of trying to get rid of President Yahya Jammeh. Those are their governance issues. You're now in power. What are you planning to do with that power in order to correct the challenges of the past?
I'm happy. Fortunately, our Minister of Justice has gone to Parliament 2 days ago to put a bill in Parliament for the revisit of the Constitution. And we have specifically said that from now on, no president in Gambia will become president without getting 51% of the votes. And these are all issues that are impediments of Africa's progress. Because Africans are very good at personalizing power and turning our leaders into gods. And in the process, it brings backwardness. That is why, with our experience, we are now going to make sure the Constitution will go to a referendum whereby what happened in the last republic cannot happen again, whereby a party with the majority of parliamentarians can change any part of the law for the interest.
So in your mind, what is the one sector that is going to transform the Gambia, given its past? And where is the opportunity?
The opportunity is freedom, liberty, and respect for human rights.
Really, that's very difficult to eat.
In
practical terms,
what I'm saying,
what do I do to the market to make some money? What is the sector that...
People will have rights to criticize government. That is why agriculture is the key, and tourism in Gambia.
So agriculture and tourism?
Tourism. Because our tourism sector, particularly this year, is vibrant now.
Okay.
But before, because of the relationship with the government, all the tourists refused to come again.
Okay.
But agriculture now, we're trying to transform it. I'll come to that when I'm presenting my case.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes.
And then I want to come back to you, sir. Pick up on what he said about, again, he has identified...
One point that my friend here raised, about this visa problem that you raised. I think really Europe should think, my uncle died in Burma, fighting for the crown in 41. So many Africans died defending the crown, the British crown. And I could not understand how they can come to Africa without our invitation, stay there for 400 years and start telling us that for us to enter Europe, you have to fulfill this condition or this conditionality. I think their conscience should play on them. This is my point of view.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. We will come back to all those things in a few moments, and I'll come back to you as well, sir. And I want to see some ladies as well contributing. Do you want to come back to respond to that?
Come back.
Yeah.
Just to come back. I fully understand your point. Empathy with what had happened with Africans and the colonial power. I told you Spain has not been in this line, but anyhow, I feel as a European. It will be a tremendous mistake in this new global world if we, Africans and Europeans, continue to exchange the chronomy, the history, the past, the memory. What we have is to look for today and tomorrow. I fully agree with you. Visa is only for two reasons: illegal immigration and terrorists. Terrorists don't need visa. Illegal immigration, they go by themselves. They don't go to the consulate to ask for visa. They are boarded. So visa is all instrument, administrative instrument. We have to find out together a new instrument in of people with mobility. But have to be done with new spirit. As I told in my introductory remark, either Europeans change their set mind, or even Africans now start to change their set mind, or will be back in the same...
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, what about you, sir? What do you say to that? This might become a discussion between the two of you.
You know, we Africans should do exactly what the Israelis are doing. If the Israelis have torn the German...
can you hear him?
Yes.
Okay, let's get the microphone to him. Briefly, if you can, sir.
If the Jews can change the whole to sympathize with them for 8 million years, Africa, 240 million young people were taken from Africa as slaves. 30 million never reached the source of any country. They were dumped in the
But how long can that continue to be the issue?
It will continue because history should not be forgotten. That's why the Holocaust, the Jews are using it every day to remind people, and people are sympathizing. And that is what
but you see,
mobilizing
if you stay with that, there's a challenge that you'll end up not sorting out.
No, it's a challenge that we will use to make sure we're not only recognized, but we're respected.
Okay, sir, what do you want to say?
You know, I like the history. And I like all we talk about. A 30, 40-year-old man should grow up and be a man. Africa is responsible for our problems. We've been cheated, we're plundered for a long time. And I was talking with the global elite people yesterday, and I did say, look, our people gathered together to get independence, but they were not prepared to lead. So we find ourselves where we are. The unfortunate thing is that we have budding, young, talented people, younger, that can come in and take the challenge. And we're even not giving them the space. But that's not the issue. So I believe that political leadership is something we need to revisit effectively in Africa and stop talking about it was caused by ABC. Believe you me, why should I go to America if there is good, the environment is good? I don't need to go there. And so they will come. But back to the right. Human capital. But you see, we need certain things to leverage human capital. There is no inclusion. Our people are hungry, they're poor, they are small scale, they are small farmers. What do you need to do? We need to do an agricultural system that allows processing, that allows small scale farmers to come together to ensure that we stop having post-harvest losses. You can't believe in Nigeria we still lose 40% of our agri to post-harvest losses. Why? Because there's no infrastructure to make sure those things are preserved. People who are doing farming cannot even have access to the market. So we need agri, but it's not. And what we're wanting from people that are outside is that if you are going to help us with your machinery for us to start processing, so we can talk about that. How can we help us with your skills in renewable to ensure that we can have off-grid lights and get light to our people?
It seems to tie in very well with the backward integration you're talking about.
That's why. But it must be done. It's not one sector. These sectors must work together. I am someone who believes in a lot about the digital divide. To solve the problem of our young people, if you roll out, for instance, a lot of, we use digital technology a lot, then we can make education a lot better for our people. Today, people still stand, and we need to change our system of education. We can improve on our health, leapfrogging technology. So we need infrastructure, we need technology, and you'll be surprised with the right leadership. 10 years from now, we won't be talking all these things in Africa.
Are there any ladies in the house that would like to say something before I go back to my panel? I'll come back to you in a moment, but I want to hear some female voices. Obi, would you like to contribute to what's going on? Let's give her the microphone for the moment. Sorry?
I'm going to go for you. Yeah. Forget about all of these things. This is now our problem.
It's our problem.
Let it be history. It's okay for history. But for goodness sake, I'm not going to spend my time in a room with people from other parts of the world discussing what we're doing ourselves and how we're going to solve the things that we do to ourselves. Major point of interest for me. I think that the historical things are part of history. Our children and our grandchildren will hear about it. They would learn the lessons. The whole world needs to learn the lessons of all the bad things that one region has done to the other at one time or the other. But I think that the conversation is about unlocking Africa's economic potentials. I need to be hearing something that is forward thinking.
And one of the things that you think will transform
So, for
Africa.
example, I totally believe that performance improved on the coattail of the ICT revolution. Africa but the ICT revolution saw Africa participate. Think of it this way. Within a decade, Africa went from 20 million telephone lines to nearly 1 billion telephone lines. That's revolutionary. But think of it from the perspective that this has happened from a consumption side of the balance sheet. In other words, Africa consumed ICT and it made such huge impact on it. What would it look like if Africa, part of creators, part of innovators in the fourth industrial revolution, in the second machine age.
Is that happening?
That's the Africa, talking about Africa of the mess that political failure continues to produce in our young people wanting to cross the Mediterranean. Do you know what it means to want to cross the Mediterranean?
What does it mean?
What it means is that there are still our young people who consider the risk of dying in the Mediterranean as being lower than the risk of staying on our continent. That hurts me. It hurts me that our political systems fail to that level. So that the conversation really should be, how do we get governance to be effective enough to be able to optimize all the factors?
That's interesting. Let's give Obi a round of applause. She's always great to hear from. I'll come back to you, sir, in a moment, but let me come back to my panel now for a moment and tell me about the Chinese example. What can Africa learn from China? Because China has done well over the last so many years. So I don't know if that's comparing mangoes and oranges, but what can be obtained from that?
Yes, thank you for the question, but frankly, I don't think this is a place to discuss Chinese, any Chinese approaches. However, as you ask this question, let me try to put it like this. Now I heard immigration, okay? And it seemed that immigration was so is whether we can change the angle from which we think about the same issue. Is there a possibility to absorb the job demand and oversupplied labors domestically? I think the possibility does exist if you accelerate your industrialization, especially industrialization based on labor-intensive industries and labor-intensive transfer of technology. And that raised the second question.
And Ethiopia has been
one of the successful cases. Raised automatically the issue of the role of government. I don't think the market can help to resolve this problem, because the market has its failures, and we can't rely on what I call the market fundamentalism to resolve development issue of Africa. The government does have roles to play in encourage this kind of transfer of labor-intensive industry to Africa. I think the government role can be summarized, in two fields. To build the infrastructure of institutions, and to build the physical. Government can behave well in these two fields. I'm sure that a lot of technology of labor-intensive industry would be the
That's
job problem.
Very interesting indeed. Yeah. We've heard very many times that China is becoming much more expensive. The labor market is becoming much more expensive in China, and that Africa is presenting an opportunity, and the youth can be a dividend if it's leveraged the way you describe it. Let me come back to you, Uri. Do you have any thoughts?
I just want to caution too much about relying too much on the example of East Asia or China. The reality these days is that manufacturing is losing jobs all over the world, including in China. Manufacturing automated at a very rapid pace. This doesn't mean, of course, that you should ignore manufacturing, that there aren't opportunities in manufacturing, but you need to have a broader approach that looks at all the sectors of the economy, all of which can be generators of jobs, and in many cases, generators of more jobs than manufacturing. In the case of Morocco, for example, all of the growth in jobs over the last 20 years, 30 years, has been in services and services and construction. Of course, you need an export base, but there are many ways that countries get foreign currency. So I want to caution against that. and underscore the point that the gentleman over there made, which is the key issue in stimulating investment in Africa is the institutional and governance mechanisms. Look, I live in the United States. I believe that the United States has much more corruption than people want to recognize. Yeah, you know. A lot of it is legalized corruption. Yeah. Okay? It's corruption done in different ways, but it's corruption. And I've worked in countries across the world. Different countries have different levels of corruption and bad governance. And there are limits. There are limits. If people do not feel that they can enforce a contract at all, if they or a major payment because they made a good profit last year, etc., this will stop investment. It doesn't matter what the opportunity, underlying opportunity is. So the key is not so much manufacturing. Manufacturing is a part of it. The key is dealing with the fundamentals of the rule of law, corruption, etc. And then opportunities arise throughout the economy.
Right, let's give everybody here a round of applause. Let's hear now from former Foreign Minister of Portugal. What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. I would love to contribute to decontaminate the migration question.
Okay.
Just pay attention to two data. One, fertility rate in Europe is 1.5 children per mother in the best case scenario. Germany, Spain, or Portugal around 1.3. The minimum you need to replace generations and guarantee your future economy is 2.01. Sorry by the detail. Okay? So Europe is living a huge demographic winter. Demographic fertility rate in 2016, 5.6 children per month. And build walls, laws, but it is inevitable. Second element I want to call your attention. In 2020, you will have 700 million smartphones in Africa. The rate of internet penetration is lower than the global, but the growth is faster. So that means that dreams, life projects, life expectations will be seen in real time. This will accelerate migrations. So Europe has two options: become a museum or open mind and look at Africa with respect for sovereignties, not condescend that Africa is a chance to co-develop, co-invest, transfer technology, and partnership for growth. What is the African duty on the African side? Good governance, political stability, constitutional stability, and rule of law enforcing contracts. Just that. Thank you.
Let's give everybody a round of applause. Thank you very much. Again, for those who missed it, he is a former foreign minister of Portugal. I was tempted to ask about the relationship between Portugal and Angola, but I'll leave that for now. Okay, I shall leave that for now. But yeah, I'll come back. I'd like to hear some more ladies. Eniola, I'm going to bring up, Eniola is going to come up in a second. Yes, madam, over there. Just give the microphone to Eniola right there. Yeah.
Is this on? Thanks very much. I'm Jessica Berlin from Germany, and I'd like to second to the comments of my European brother from Portugal. It's absolutely right. In Europe today, and I can speak specifically for Germany, we have a real digital skills and digital solutions gap and shortage. And who in the world right now is leading the way in digital solutions for rural development, in access to services and healthcare and education? It's not Europe, it's Africa. If you go to villages in Germany today, you feel like you're back in the 90s. And for African innovators and for forward-thinking European investors to see that development dynamic is ripe for being turned on its head. So it's...
you know,
yes.
I'm sorry to say this, but you know, again, I go back to just how difficult it is for an African to get into Europe.
This is true.
This is not an equal relationship here.
Yes, and that's precisely where people, quite frankly, like myself, come into play.
Right.
Who are building those bridges and trying to create.
How are you doing that?
I founded a consultancy called Construct, and it's precisely focused on building business relationships and PPPs between African, European,
Is anybody
and
paying
Asian
attention to
entrepreneurs.
what you're doing? Do you get the sense that Europeans understand what you're trying to achieve?
We are young, we are new, but it's an idea whose time has come,
Okay.
and it's an idea coming from ministries.
Good
So
luck.
the resonance needs to be.
Fair enough. We'll talk to her. Let's give her a round of applause. Eniola, come up and... Eniola, I bring her up because she's done a lot of work in the Niger
you,
Delta.
Jessica, for that. Appreciate that. If you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. That's what we said, right?
Yeah.
My question actually is around the. So we understand that there are sectors that could be significant growth, but I want to unpack the growth piece because it seems like there are sectors, as Madam Obi had mentioned, that are not here yet. They're nascent in many countries. ICT, growth, and job opportunities in the medium, longer term. But there are other areas in terms of agric and obviously with manufacturing booming in terms of in Nigeria, for example, and other countries as well. I wanted to unpack in terms of what do you see within the kind of, maybe it's the lowest hanging fruits of sectors, choices or prioritization that could really start to unlock those.
Okay.
And the second piece around that is how do we find those kind of painkillers? Because fundamentally we're seeing that there have to be significant basic solutions that can meet the very basic needs of Africans.
Okay, Uri, I'm good.
Okay. First of all, you can't say it's the same, different context. Some countries that are very rich in natural resources and exportable natural resources like energy, etc., have a gigantic opportunity, which many other countries would like to have, which is not necessarily in manufacturing. It probably is not in manufacturing because they are high-cost environment, but in developing on the basis of their natural resource exports, a very vibrant service sector, okay? That's what's happened in manage their natural resources well. But you have to manage them well. You cannot have these resources squandered. Countries have enormous agricultural potential and need to exploit that potential more effectively than they are at the moment. Some countries may have an opportunity in manufacturing. These would be countries that have very little other natural resources and that have large populations, hopefully with decent skills. In each of these sectors, there is a common, which have to be recognized, and we've mentioned many times. If you don't have the basis of enforcing contracts, rule of law, none of these sectors can work. If you have those, then frankly, any one of these sectors can work, provided the economic conditions that I've described exist.
Okay. Jaiyeola, do you want to add to that?
Well, just to say, I mean, in addition to that, we have huge arable land in Africa. And a lot of our people are involved in agric. And so, in terms of allowing some inclusion, whatever we can to scale up the acreage and the yield, and in terms of processing it, is a very easy area to go to. The digital space, that area, this does not require huge financial investment. But no doubt, the infrastructure to move things around is something I think we can do.
Okay, we're going to get into regional integration in a moment, but can I hear from the lady at the back, and then I'll come back to you, sir. Let's get the lady at the back to speak, please. I met her earlier today. I think she does some work with philanthropy. Is that right? Yeah, can we have her microphone switched on, please?
Switched on.
Yeah, go on.
I think it's okay now.
Yes.
Right. I think there is an important part of the discussion that we should be having, and that is around the role that philanthropists play in driving development on the African continent.
Okay, share your interest in that.
I'm Laoye, and I'm the executive director of the African Philanthropy Forum. And our focus is promoting homegrown philanthropy on the African continent.
What exactly does philanthropy do?
Philanthropy helps in terms of filling the gap where government has failed. A lot of the discussion this morning has talked about the failure of government. We will not have the issues we have in Africa today, or young people migrating across the ocean, if government worked. But while we're waiting for government to work, we have philanthropists filling the gap by supporting non-profit organizations, civil society organizations to provide services that government has still to provide in the area of health, education, infrastructure. Recent research has shown that we have an increasing number of high net worth individuals in Africa with a combined wealth of, I think, over $800 billion on business, depending on aid from outside of Africa, because we can take charge of our own development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I wonder if anybody would like to pick up on the point she's making. Would you like to pick up on it at all, philanthropy? Anybody, nobody? But there is another point to be made about access to capital.
Philanthropy is very good, and we welcome all of them. But I think in the new global governance and the UN system, the new conglomerates, corporations have to make a new compact with the UN international institution. Have to be a new approach. We cannot just wait for the goodwill of Bill Gates that comes here and then, and we welcome it. We have to organize the way composed by the new corporation that have to share the responsibility.
Okay, sir, let me come. Just tell me about access to capital, because that's, I think, part of the point that she's making. The fact that even if you have a great idea, you still need to be able to raise.
Know that access to capital is poor. It's poor because there is not even inclusion. I mean, there are people who don't have bank account. There are people who don't have access to financial services. So even if the guy doesn't have access to financial services, how do you even meet his needs? So we need to work more about access to capital. And sometimes, I think maybe it was discussion here, I can't remember but during this program, that even the multinational agencies and agencies of the world, you don't do projects that are, the man there in the village that want to be included maybe does not need more than about $5,000. Of the role of the digital economy can play, and how do you make sure that you capture everybody in and then you have access to it. I mean, for instance, I'm ashamed to say that we don't even know the number of people. So people don't have unique ID cards, so you don't bring them into the system. So these are things that need to be done to make access available to people.
Okay, sir, very briefly.
Rabia Mukhtar, Texas A&M, and the American University in Beirut. I'd like to come back to a point that you made this morning, which is local. I haven't heard any of the panelists this morning talking. If you're going to localize these issues, securities of food, water, energy, you need to have R&D. Building in African institutions, in the regional institutions, for local knowledge creation.
That's interesting. Let me come to you, sir. You have a point to make as well. Can we get the microphone to the front? And then I'll come to the lady here. But local resource mobilization, if I can come to you, sir, is that something that you'd want to tackle?
That's fine.
Sorry, research and development, local knowledge.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, because you've got to wonder, if you're going to talk about regional integration, how do you then localize? I don't know, how do you make the two work?
Yes. No, but I'm going to be short. Important indeed, and for promoting economic development. But it needs also some preconditions. Development of real economy, including agricultural development, industrial development, the development of service sectors. So it's only
people
on
talk
the
about
basis.
development of education, but what does that really mean? Because every country has different realities.
People need to be educated so as to make some innovation. You know, I think that is what R&D means.
Interesting. And then, yes, sir.
Yeah, Patrick Worms again. The sector that is going to be the future of Africa, and indeed the future of the world, uniquely human, because in the world in which artificial intelligence and automatization is destroying manufacturing jobs and service jobs, the brain and the human hand. And what is more quintessential than the human brain and the human hand working together? Farming, gardening, farming at a small scale. And this is something which Africa can excel. It has more agricultural land which is underproducing than any other continent on the planet. It has more young people that are working and living in rural areas and yearning how to better their livelihoods than any other continent on the planet. And once they have the security of contracts, once they have the rule of law, once they have secure tenure, which not only allows them to invest in their land, but allows them to get loans from banks, and they don't need $200, but they need that knowledge. And that is a job that is future-proof, because it's going to be decades before we have the kind of robots with the kind of artificial intelligence that can do the sorts of things that you can do with a pair of eyes, a brain, and two hands.
Let's give him a round of applause. Very strong point, that. And then the lady here, can we get a microphone to the front?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Chika, and I'm a tech entrepreneur in Nigeria. And, you know, a comment I want to make and even ask to you guys is I actually believe what's going to take Africa forward is technology. And Madam Obi, she definitely touched on this, you know, that it's the next revolution. But I don't feel like we're having this conversation enough. We keep talking about other things that require a lot of government involvement. And I feel that technology is one of the few industries that someone in Yaba can take just, you know, a couple thousand naira, set up a website and selling something, start creating some type of business and grow and scale. So what is being done to encourage more people to go into the tech industry? And it's something that we've seen already leapfrog through mobile technology and through other elements. We're seeing people using artificial intelligence, machine learning. So what's being done to cultivate this? And it's not even really a discussion that we're having.
Interesting. Yes, I'll come first to you and then to you, sir.
Now, what just to rebound on what about the financing and the local? I mean, the problem today that sometimes we talk on global scale, the responsibility of UN, the responsibility of the World African Development Bank, Frontier Islamic Bank. But for Africa now, we have the private banks, but the financial institution that could work with this small account, the risk of the small and medium enterprises. We have to create, and that Europe and China and other capitals could be coming together. We need a kind of specific financial institution for Africa that can cope with the reality, not a big project, not the big infrastructure that are going to be financed, but we need to increase, you know,
isn't that the role of indigenous banks?
Well, the banks can do it, but they will not take some risk. They will not take some specific entrepreneur that want to start their enterprise. So I think that it's a possibility in order to have this local new mentality to create this financial institution.
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, to what Chika said, I did say that if there are two sectors we need to look at, it's agri and the ICT, because they don't require the huge funding we like. And I relate to what you said, sir, about agri. But again, we need to, I don't believe in one sector or feature. It must be integrated. Someone came out this morning and he was introduced as a farmer. And he did say, the face of a new farmer.
It's over there.
Look,
it's over there.
There must be a new farmer in Africa. A farmer who is sure that because there is sanctity of contract, there is an off-taker, right price, because there is price discovery, because there is access to the internet. It's a combination of things that must come together. And I do agree that locally we must do something. You know, someone asked a question about local research. In a situation where our schools and universities are gone, who does research? So that's a problem. So the educational system is broken down, which was a point that Obi tried to raise. But the question is, which one comes first? I believe that through the use of the digital space, you can leapfrog a number of things. Even today, there are many people who are lending little money to a lot of those women because young Nigerians are coming together and on lending money areas where to not work before. So that's why for us, we believe that the younger generation are better positioned and they are better positioned to do a lot. The problem they have is that people of my generation are blocking the way. And I did tell them yesterday, nobody's going to hand over this to you guys. You guys must wake up and then wrestle and take it from us. Because truly, you have all it takes to break the divide.
Okay, and let's give him a round of applause. Obi, I wanted to talk about the issue of integration, economic integration. This is something that you speak about quite passionately. I wonder what that means for the future of the continent and unlocking the potential of the continent.
Yeah, so it's all about markets, right? And because it's all about markets, we know that we shouldn't be expecting so much. What's the size of Gambia? We shouldn't be expecting so much as brilliantly as with Rwanda. What's the size of the Rwandan economy? So it is absolutely important that Africa should be joined up economically. So we need to have the kinds of physical integration through critical infrastructure to join up the space of Africa. We also need to have institutional and policy measures that are coordinated in the kind of way that they become attractive to the private sector, both within the continent and this opportunity lies in the fact that today, even without the right kind of political agenda for regional integration, the citizens are finding themselves. Yeah. There is a lot of trade going on across the continent that is not being captured through the formal channels and formal systems. We need to do more to make those activities more productive. Productivity of regional trade on the continent is hinged, of course, on the fact that you are currently doing between 13 to 15% of regional trade compared to Uri. I don't remember what the number is for North America now, but at least Europe is more than 70%. South Asia is at 13 to 15%. That is too low. Imagine what would happen to Africa's growth if we improved this way. The two anchor economies, South Africa and Nigeria, for every 1% of GDP growth of any of those countries, the rest of Africa gets a 0.05% growth. That's significant. So imagine if the entire continent is actually joined up in a way that if Africa cannot trade with the rest of the world, Africa can trade with Africa. That would be a phenomenal boost to Africa's economic growth. So whatever political constraints are holding back this economic integration process, it should become voices for ensuring that domestically, regional integration goes up to the top of the agenda.
Let's give a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And please introduce yourself first, madam, before you make your point.
Yes, Eliade Gaman, professor of mathematical finance at Johns Hopkins University, and an expert in commodities and commodity derivatives, futures on Bitcoins, if you want, as an example, which I helped launching, even though I am very suspicious. My goal is not to discuss that at this moment, but to go back to two points made by a gentleman. Unfortunately, he left, and somebody who is still here, and I will strongly agree with him. My message is to give education, artificial intelligence. My second passport is US, and I'm telling you that never in the US today would you be allowed to suggest that ladies from Africa should produce 5 children from the ladies in Berlin and Europe to have only 1.3. It would be acceptable if these 5 children were very highly educated and would not be sent to Europe to be employed in low-skilled jobs, suggesting that those who go to Europe will go to the highly paid or not highly paid but variable jobs, and those who stay here can not only go to industry, can go to distance working in all these digital activities. So I don't believe that saying that Africa could be a factory of human beings for Europe, I find that so offensive. And I think that it is so sweet to be in Morocco. Why do we want people from Morocco to go to Europe to work with low-skilled jobs? We don't want them. We want them to be like many places in India where you are producing software for banks and all kinds of healthcare activities and so on. Africa to have a choice. The choice to stay in their beautiful continent and to live well and to be educated, to be given all the tools.
Let's give her a round of applause. She's one of my favorite thinkers. I think she has how many, 4, 5, 6 PhDs? I'm not sure how many there are, lady. But she definitely packs a punch. Ladies and gentlemen, is anybody sitting on something that they must say? Because I need to close this. You really have to want to say this. It must be supremely important. Like I said, extremely important, a game changer. I want some disruptive thinkers. Where? I see the hands going down now. Are you actually going? It better be good, man.
Yeah, thank you. I want to speak in support to what the last speaker just said. I know it's important that we have all of this conversation, but I'm going to use a personal example. So I spent 5 years studying electrical engineering in the university, and when I was done, I didn't have any single hands-on knowledge on anything. Software, we were taught Fortran in our second year when the world had gone on this stuff. Now the problem is there a way we can begin to teach the African child something will be useful in the development of Africa? We cannot keep doing stuff that has been done in the 1960s and expect to catch up with the rest of the world.
Thank you. I can relate to that. I can tell you about places, and I can tell you about the French Revolution. I read Voltaire, I read Rousseau. None of this stuff is relevant, to be honest. But I had to do it because my school system required that. So do we all agree that the most important thing is education? Is it? Yes. Fundamental. But clearly, there's a lot of discussion to be had about what could drive Africa's development. But because I've run out of time, and this is a discussion that could continue and must continue in the different conversations that you have, I'd like to thank my panelists. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Uri Dadush, Senior Fellow, OCP Center. Let's give him a round of applause. Guang, General Director, Institute of Western Asian and African Studies, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Let's give him a round of applause. And he doesn't say it here, but he's one of the most important people in Nigeria. Laoye, thank you. Jaiyeola, who is the CEO, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Let's give him a round of applause. And obviously the man of the moment is Miguel Moratinos, who is the former Foreign Minister of Spain. Thank you for taking all the punches. On behalf of everybody else. Would you like to have a final word?
Yeah.
What is your final word?
We've been talking
about giving me a bit of grief.
We were talking about globalization and the consequences of bad globalization. And I have a quote from former Minister of Morocco, Mr. Benaissa, who said that globalization has killed neighborhood. Fukuyama said that it was the end of history. There was not the end of history. So I say it's not the end of geography. So, my dear friend, Europeans and Africans, we should live together. And the new globalization has a solution. That's regionalization. Internally, but also from Africa. That is the way to solve our problem.
Thank you. Our final word, sir.
Well, just to say that, I mean, at least we as Africans must take our support will come everywhere if we make ourselves attractive. And therefore, we need to rise up and challenge and ensure there are good institutions, good government in place, and good policies that make things work.
What about you, sir? What are your final thoughts?
Yes, well, I would say that, you know, there would probably no single industry and single technology that may drive African, you know, economic development. Everything should be integrated, and I sincerely wish faster growth and the prosperity of African countries.
And finally, Uri.
You know, I'm an optimist, so I'm quite hopeful that, particularly on communications technology and international exchange, that we will be getting a gradual but governance in Africa. And as a result of that, you're going to see significantly improved economic performance. But there is no doubt that the next 20, 30 years, because of the demographics, are going to be something of a watershed, a very complex and difficult period.
That's interesting, very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alan Kasujja. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your 20 minutes of break. We'll be in the ballroom at 4:15.